The shelter was loud, as always, barking layered over whining, the rhythmic thud of tails against metal, the sharp click of shoes on concrete. But in the farthest, dimmest corner, behind a rusting gate and a faded "Adopt Me" sign, curling at the edges, was a silence so still it felt like absence. Bruno lay curled tight on a threadbare blanket, his body more bones than strength now. His once majestic coat had thinned, dulled by time and neglect, clinging in patches to skin that sagged with age. His eyes, the color of dark chestnuts, barely blinked anymore. They stared forward, not out of hope nor sadness, but something quieter. Surrender. Every day, feet passed, kids tugging at parents' hands, parents tugging back, eyes sparkling at bouncing puppies, at dogs who leapt and spun with joy. A parade of life marching past him, never once pausing. Bruno had learned not to lift his head. There was no point. He had given up the dance of pretending. The tail wags, the hopeful ears, the eager paws tapping the bars. It always ended the same, eyes looking past him, laughter at another kennel, doors swinging shut behind strangers who never turned back. And so, Bruno stayed curled, barely breathing beneath the fluorescent flicker above. To exist without expectation had become his only way of enduring. But that morning, something changed. The shelter door creaked open, just another sound in the usual din. Bruno didn't move, didn't twitch, didn't wonder. But footsteps, just one pair, walked differently, slower, not pulled by excitement, but guided by something quieter, deeper. They moved past the bright kennels, the jumping tails, the high-pitched barks, and then they stopped, right in front of him. He didn't lift his head. It would be like all the others, he was sure, a glance, a sigh, a step away. But she didn't step away. Instead, the woman knelt. She crouched until her eyes were level with his, not bright or expectant, not scanning him for flaws, just looking, seeing. Elena Foster, 44, had come to the shelter with no intention of adopting. Just passing through, she told herself. Maybe to donate. Maybe just to remember what it felt like to be near animals again. But now, here she was, on her knees in front of a frail old German shepherd who hadn't so much as twitched. There was something about the way he didn't move, the quiet of him, the heavy silence pressed against her chest. Other dogs had barked, pawed, begged for her attention. But this one had stopped asking, and that broke something in her. Elena didn't say anything. She simply sat there for a while, knees pressed to the cold floor, hands resting gently on her thighs. The noise of the shelter faded to a hum behind her, muffled by the weight of this quiet moment. She leaned forward just slightly, until her fingers touched the rusted edge of the kennel gate. Inside, Bruno didn't move, but something in his gaze flickered, a soft twitch of the ear, a slight shift of breath. He had noticed her. Not fully, not with curiosity or trust, but like an old man glancing up from a long sleep, tired, suspicious of hope. She slowly reached her hand through the bars. It hovered there, palm open, fingers loose. She didn't try to touch him, didn't make a sound. The gesture was simple, delicate, an invitation, not a command. And Bruno blinked. It was the first real movement he had made in hours. A slow blink, then a lift of his head, no more than a few inches. His cloudy eyes met hers, guarded and searching. He sniffed the air cautiously. The scent on her hand wasn't perfume or antiseptic or dog food. It smelled like wool and winter and something faintly floral, like a memory from a long time ago. Something human. His body tensed, old muscles stiffened beneath thinning fur, but he didn't pull away. Instead, with trembling hesitation, he leaned just enough to press his nose gently against her fingertips. It wasn't trust, not yet. It was the ghost of it. Elena inhaled sharply, tears prickling without warning. That single touch, a whisper of a moment, was the first time he had let someone near in, who knows how long. A shelter worker had been standing a few steps behind her, watching. She cleared her throat softly. "He's been here over a year," she said. "No one ever looks twice." Elena didn't answer. She just kept her hand still, her breath steady. The worker continued, "Quieter now. We put signs on his gate. Loyal, gentle, deserves a second chance. But most people want puppies, young dogs. Bruno stopped trying a long time ago." Bruno sniffed her hand again, then slowly laid his head back down. But this time, it rested a few inches closer to her than before. He had inched forward. Elena's heart broke open. She whispered, not to the worker, not even fully to herself, but to the dog who had been left behind by everyone else. "I see you." The shelter worker's voice softened. "Most dogs bark when someone comes near. Bruno, he just watches, or sleeps. Some days he barely eats." Elena didn't flinch. She stayed crouched, fingertips still near the bars. Her eyes never left Bruno's. He didn't bark, didn't wag, but he was watching her now, really watching. The quiet weight of that gaze pulled something ancient and maternal out of her. "How long has he been like this?" she asked. The worker folded her arms, glanced down. "Since the day he got here. He was surrendered after his owner passed. The family brought him in, and never came back. It was like flipping a switch. He just shut down." Elena felt something tighten in her throat. A year. A whole year without a home, without affection, without even a name called in love. She looked again at the dog inside the kennel, not just a dog now, but someone who had lived and lost and learned silence. Bruno's head lifted again, just slightly. His nose twitched once, twice. Then he exhaled a long, quiet breath, like someone easing out of a nightmare. Elena whispered, "You poor boy." She slowly stood up, her knees stiff, her heart heavy. "I want to meet him," she said. The shelter worker blinked, surprised. "You want to meet him?" "Yes." Elena's voice didn't waver. "I want to meet Bruno." The worker hesitated. "He's not like the others. Doesn't respond to treats, doesn't play. He doesn't even like going outside anymore. You sure?" Elena turned toward the kennel again. Bruno was still watching her, not with hope, but with something else. A quiet readiness. A soft question. She nodded. "Yes, I'm sure." The worker sighed and reached for the latch. "Okay, we'll go slow." The gate creaked as it opened, a sound that should have meant freedom. But Bruno didn't move. Elena stepped back, careful not to crowd the space. The worker crouched and gently clipped the leash to Bruno's old collar. Her hands were practiced, gentle. Still, he flinched. Elena could see the twitch in his muscles, the way his body stiffened. His paws didn't budge. "It's okay, buddy," the worker murmured. "You remember this part, right?" Bruno didn't answer. He simply stared at the ground, frozen like stone, the leash hanging limp between them. Elena knelt again, letting her coat settle softly against the floor. She didn't reach out this time, just waited. The silence was deep, not empty, but full of something hard to name. Bruno blinked slowly. Then, with visible effort, he pushed himself up. It was not graceful. His legs wobbled, his shoulders sagged, and his tail hung low. But he stood, on legs that barely remembered how. Elena felt tears sting again. The worker gave a gentle tug. "Come on, Bruno." He took one step, then another, stopped. The hallway stretched ahead, wide and unfamiliar. Other dogs barked from their kennels, excited and loud. It all seemed too big, too alive. Bruno's breath quickened. Elena noticed his tail curl slightly toward his belly. His body leaned back, not trying to escape, just unsure. "Hey," she said softly, "I'm right here." And maybe he heard her voice differently, lower, warmer than the rest. Or maybe it was just the air, the scent of something that wasn't fear. Whatever it was, Bruno took another step. Outside, the play yard waited. Nothing fancy, just a fence, some toys, worn grass. But to Bruno, it might as well have been the moon. He paused at the threshold. He could have turned back. Instead, he tilted his head, just a little, and walked forward. The yard was quiet. A few plastic chew toys lay scattered across dry grass. A faded tennis ball sat forgotten near the fence. The winter sky above was pale and soft, casting a dull silver glow across the shelter's outdoor space. Cold wind tugged gently at the trees. Bruno stepped outside like a ghost, unsure if the world would still hold him. His paws touched the ground, and he froze. The earth felt unfamiliar beneath him. Not cold concrete, not the kennel floor, but something softer, alive. A single dried leaf skittered across the dirt, and he flinched as if it were a threat. Elena didn't speak. She stood a few feet behind him, holding the leash loosely in one hand. Her other hand was tucked inside her coat, fingers pressed against her heart. He's out here, she thought. He came out. It was more than she expected, maybe more than he expected of himself. Bruno took another slow step, his ribs visible with each breath. His tail didn't wag, but it didn't curl under as tightly anymore. His ears twitched at a sound, a distant bark, a passing car. He looked around the yard, not with curiosity, but with wariness, like someone who had been let out too many times only to be dragged back in again. And then, the smallest change. His nose lifted, just a fraction, just enough to sniff the air. Elena saw it, that movement. To anyone else, it would have meant nothing. But to her, to someone who had been watching every hesitant breath he took, it was everything. It meant he was searching again, that something inside him, buried beneath months of grief and stillness, was reaching for the world again. The shelter worker leaned against the fence quietly, arms crossed, watching the impossible unfold. "I've never seen him stay out here this long," she said, almost under her breath. "Usually he just stands by the door, waiting to go back in." Elena didn't take her eyes off Bruno. Maybe he's waiting for something else now. Bruno took another shaky step, then paused beside an old rubber bone. He sniffed it once, then turned away. Play wasn't in him yet, but the fact that he noticed, that mattered. The wind picked up, brushing through his dull coat. He blinked against it, blinked again. His nose twitched once more. Then he sat. Just like that. It looked more like a collapse than a decision, but he stayed upright, tail still, chest rising with slow, deliberate breaths. The yard stretched out before him, open, strange, limitless. Elena lowered herself into a squat nearby, not too close, just within his sight. "You're doing great," she whispered. Bruno looked over his shoulder. Their eyes met, not for long, but long enough. And in that glance, Elena felt it, like the first faint beam of light through a thick cloud. He saw her, not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as someone who hadn't turned away. She could almost hear the question still hanging between them, too fragile to speak aloud. "Are you going to leave too?" And though her mouth didn't move, she answered. Not this time. Bruno lay curled in the back seat of Elena's car, his frail body motionless but tense beneath the soft blanket. The ride was smooth, but every bump sent a small tremble through his limbs. Not fear, at least not the kind that barked or bolted, but something older, quieter. A fear learned slowly over time, the kind that settled deep into the bones. Elena kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He looked too small for his breed, like someone had folded him in on himself. His head rested flat between his paws, ears drooped low, but his eyes, those heavy, thoughtful eyes, remained open. They watched the world through glass with a strange mixture of awe and suspicion. For a moment, Elena wondered if he even remembered what it was like. Life beyond cages, beyond metal bars and cold floors. What did freedom mean to a dog who had stopped believing in it? She whispered, almost without thinking, "We're almost home." The word home caught in her throat. What did that mean to him now? Would it comfort him, confuse him? Would he even step out of the car? When they arrived, the sky was starting to dim. Elena pulled into the driveway of a small, cozy cottage nestled under a canopy of bare winter trees. The house wasn't grand, but it was quiet, safe, waiting. She opened the back door and knelt beside him. "Hey, Bruno," she murmured, voice warm. "This is it." Bruno didn't move. Elena reached out and gently slid her arm beneath his belly. His body stiffened, but he didn't resist. He simply allowed it, allowed her to carry the weight he no longer trusted himself to bear. She lifted him with care, her breath held tight, as if afraid one wrong move might shatter him. His ribs pressed against her arm. He was light, too light, and still trembling. She set him down slowly onto the walkway, the blanket draped gently over his back like a shield. Bruno stood there, unmoving. The scent of pine and dry earth filled the winter air. The porch light flickered to life, casting a warm glow across the steps. But Bruno didn't see light. He saw a doorway, and doorways had always meant endings. He hesitated at the threshold, his cloudy eyes turned up to Elena's, not begging, not pleading, just asking, "Is this safe?" She knelt beside him and whispered, "You're safe now, Bruno." He let out a long breath. Then, slowly, like stepping into memory, he moved forward. The first paw crossed the line, then the second. The soft wood floor greeted him, and he paused, sniffing the unfamiliar scent of lavender and dust and something else. Comfort. He stood in the entryway, still, frozen. Not because he didn't want to enter, but because he didn't know how. Elena stepped back, giving him space. She didn't coax, didn't pull the leash. She simply waited. The house was quiet. No barking, no echoes, just the hum of the heater and the faint ticking of a clock above the mantel. Bruno's paws rested on the threshold, like he was standing between two worlds. One he had barely survived, and one he wasn't sure he deserved to enter. Then, after a long, still moment, he took a step. The floor beneath him was soft, warm with wear. He sniffed the air, curious now, not frightened. His tail didn't lift, but it stopped curling tight to his belly. To his left, a dog bed sat beside the fireplace, fluffed and waiting. A bowl of fresh water glimmered in the light. He looked at neither. Instead, Bruno turned and walked toward her. His legs were slow, uncertain, but each step brought him closer. Elena stayed perfectly still, and then, without sound, without ceremony, he pressed his head gently against her leg. Not a nudge, not a lean, a surrender, a choice. Elena's breath caught. She looked down, eyes stinging, and slowly ran her hand over the rough patch of fur behind his ears. "You're home now," she whispered. For real. Bruno didn't move for a long time. His head stayed pressed against her leg, as if drawing strength from stillness, as if touch itself had become unfamiliar and sacred. Elena didn't rush it. She just stayed there, kneeling beside him, fingers gently stroking the faded fur along his neck. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was healing. His breathing began to slow, not shallow, not panicked, just calm. Then came the smallest motion, barely there. His tail moved, not high, not fast, but once, a single slow wag. Elena blinked. It felt like witnessing a sunrise after a long winter night. This wasn't just progress. This was something deeper, not just comfort, but trust. For the first time, Bruno wasn't surviving. He was choosing to stay. The days that followed unfolded like pages from a book, long left unopened. Bruno didn't transform overnight. He didn't bound through the yard or leap into Elena's arms like in fairy tales. Healing, for him, was quieter. Some mornings, he wouldn't leave his bed. Some nights, he'd pace the hallway, haunted by echoes only he could hear. But there were moments, small, steady ones, that built something stronger than speed ever could. He began to follow Elena from room to room, not out of anxiety but curiosity. He would sit near her feet while she read, his eyes drifting closed to the sound of pages turning. He started eating again, slowly, deliberately. Each meal felt like an agreement. I choose to stay. He didn't bark. But one afternoon, when the wind slammed the front door shut, he trotted over to Elena's side, ears alert, then rested his chin on her knee. And just yesterday, just once, he wagged his tail when she entered the room. Not because she had food, not because she called, just because she was there. On a quiet evening as snow began to fall again, Elena sat beside the fireplace, a blanket wrapped around her legs, tea steaming in her hand. Bruno lay near the hearth, curled but not tense, his body warm and finally at rest. The flames danced in his tired eyes, and as he looked at her, she saw it. The thing she had hoped for since that first day behind the kennel bars. Not fear, not grief, but peace. She smiled, setting her mug aside and whispering, "You're not alone anymore, Bruno." He blinked slowly. Then, with effort, he pushed himself up, walked the few steps to her side, and rested his head in her lap. There was no grand moment, no music, just the quiet sound of trust settling into the room like snow on branches. Bruno wasn't broken. He had just been waiting for someone to see him, to stay, to believe, and Elena had. She hadn't just rescued a dog. She had restored a life. And in return, Bruno had given her something just as rare, a love that asked for nothing but presence, and gave everything in return.